Hello, and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened, where we discuss, explore, and connect with fellow empaths, healers, intuitives, and seekers. Hello, empaths. Welcome to the show. We are so excited to discuss that feeling you get when you're at a job and you realize that it's no longer your path. I think that's one of the scariest places to be in life. And so joining us to discuss this metamorphosis time so many of us have gone through is Choi. She practiced internal medicine in hospitals and primary care for nearly 15 years before transitioning to podcasting. Dissatisfied with the limitations of corporate medicine, she sought a deeper exploration of health and well-being through her podcast, Lost or Found. And now she's sharing the journey of liberating herself from an enmeshed family and an impossible medical career in her new book, Entangling. Welcome back to the show, Michelle.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here with both of you. I know I said this on the previous show, but you guys are like my spiritual heroes and you've been such a huge part of my own growth. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. We are so excited to have you on, and we have just been devouring your book and reading through your story. And I think what strikes me most about this book is how honest you are about the difficulty you had, not only in the medical field, but also growing up in a family that really relied on you for so much. It's almost like you were the glue walking over those cracked eggshells.
Totally. And I think as a woman sometimes we were almost reared to be like perpetual people pleasers, you know? And I think that's a quality that I excelled at. I never complained. Whatever I saw, I never cried, you know? But then I took that into my career. And when there's inherent abuse, either in your family or even institution of work, I think it's really hard if you continue to be a people pleaser when you're bleeding inside. And I think that's where I found my path. And I found you guys when I was bleeding.
Well, I hope we were able to staunch some of that for you.
Definitely. And I think you know, I didn't quite understand what was happening to me at work, and I worked in corporate medicine, as you said, both in the hospital and primary care setting. And, being a doctor was not what I thought it was going to be. I think everyone has a misnotion that you go into it to help people. But unfortunately, in modern day medicine in the US, you don't work for yourself, you work for corporate medicine. And they put on certain pressures for you where, when you practice, you may not be doing what you thought you actually needed to do to help someone. And it's really to allay the societal pressures of, being in corporate medicine and actually helping someone. And unfortunately, I was becoming someone who I really, really didn't like. And I feel I was pretending a lot, pretending in medicine, or even when I had my 7-minute, visits with my patients, I was pretending. And I think that's what instigated this book. I didn't want to pretend anymore. I was falling apart because I was pretending. And I started to wonder what it would feel like if you really didn't lie and you said the truth. And that's how the book came about.
The book is a beautiful read, and it reads the way you speak, as I mentioned before we started recording, and it really captures the essence of who you are and what you've been through. And when people meet you, they see someone who's beautiful, accomplished, educated, had this dream job, this dream life, and you were really, really vulnerable in this book. So thank you, because I think when people see someone that they may hold in esteem or think has it all, and then you share that your words resonate with so many of us because we've lived it or we know people who have lived it. One thing towards the beginning of the book that really, really captivated me was you talked about the difference between moral injury and burnout. I had never heard it described that way. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because it does feel like it was a huge catalyst for the book, for the change, for all these wonderful things you've brought into your life.
Yeah, thank you. I think many doctors are experiencing what I've experienced, I'm not alone. It's just that many are afraid to speak up, And initially, when I quit my medical career, I thought I was burnt out. I didn't even know what the term moral injury was. Like, there is an aspect where, like, I was so beaten and I was so angry. But then as I quit, I had mentioned this before, like, I grieved for a year over a job I hated, because I felt like a failure. Like I had reached the pinnacle of so-called success, but I couldn't handle it, and I blamed it on myself. But the problem is, many doctors feel this way, and many don't complain because we're all afraid of giving up what we know as a safe place when it's definitely not a safe place. But what doctors are experiencing when you can't practice medical medicine, when you go against your own ethical standard, that's moral injury. There's a systemic problem at large where you can't practice the way you wish or you hope for, or do the right thing for a patient because there's systemic pressures from corporate medicine telling you that you only have a couple minutes. No, you don't need to talk to them about their like problems behind their problem. Like if you're bleeding from the butthole, there's greater problems at large, but you just give a medicine for it because it's the number of patients you see, not who you actually help. And I think we're seeing a huge dilemma where the ERs are so busy. You can't even get a primary care doctor appointment. And I really feel that's because we're not helping anyone. And if you're just kind of running around in the hamster circle, not fixing anything, and these like band-aid fixes are absolutely useless. And, medicine can't change unless corporate medicine changes. And I don't know who's going to fix this problem, but there is a greater problem at large.
Yeah, and you felt that dichotomy between what you knew you were supposed to do, what was morally right, and what you were being tasked with. And I think that's an incredibly difficult crossroads to be at. You know, I always talk on the show about how hard it was for me to leave my job at the community college, and I'm not putting down at all working at a community college, but let's just say it's not on the same level as leaving a medical career. I mean, I'm sure you were thinking about all the years you spent in school and all the prep you did to reach the pinnacle of what really is defined as the top of success in our society. And you're right, I underlined this because I think a lot of us can resonate with this. You said, I grew up with the inherent understanding that my kind was not meant to quit, suffer to survive and achieve greatness at any cost, and deal with the consequences later. Achievement was the goal. Now, I know that was unique to your family situation, but I think that's also unique to being an American, right? Where we're really told achievement is what makes you successful and happy. But given that your family had put so much pressure on you to achieve and succeed and become a doctor, I think it must have been doubly hard for you to walk away.
I think so. I think there's like many pressures, and I think the worst actually is like the pressure that you put on yourself. And I don't think we should like compare because I think what you experience is very, very real, right? Like that was your idea of success, right? That was successful, and this was my parents' idea, but like I mean, it was getting to the point where it was killing me. Like, and I mentioned them as like the white collared mobsters. They don't care like what you really do as long as you go on to the next patient. And I was living like a very empty life. Like I would go into a patient's room prepared to leave. Like as soon as I got in there, like I was getting ready to leave, and I think that's such a wrong mentality. And it was eating at me. Like I had my own ethical standards and I didn't realize like I still had morality, but I did, But it was really eating at me and I couldn't see myself like doing that for the rest of my life because I was already imagining like dying. Like I was already imagining my death. I wasn't living. And it's a really scary decision to decide to leave. And I think in the end, I realized, oh my gosh, I left for my life. and speaking up about this, because a lot of doctors are suffering right now and no one talks about it. There's a New York Times article that I mentioned in the book that brought up moral injury with like Doctors Anonymous. No, like only one doctor brought up his name, but so many doctors are afraid of retribution. It's really sad.
It is. It's sad and scary.
Definitely. And like I think what's true is that we are our worst enemy, even more than my parents or what I had worked for. Like, I mean, granted, my mom still doesn't know, but but that's not important. You know what I mean? Like, my biggest enemy was me.
Wait. How long have you kept this from your mom?
Well, my mom has mental illness, and I feel like in my interacting with her, as I describe in the book, there's certain things where like like where I feel like she doesn't need to know that, you know,
Yeah.
because she's mentally ill. And why are you feeding things to a person who can't rationalize that information? If I feel like if I were to dispel this information to her, like a rational person could maybe possibly work it through, but she just cannot. And I feel like I don't want to talk about real things with her if I know she can't handle it.
Hmm.
This is how I'm planning to maintain our relationship.
I totally get that.
And that's so healthy. It's a healthy relationship. And you're very open in the book talking about the enmeshment, especially with your parents. And that may not be a term that a lot of people are familiar with. Could you talk about what enmeshment is and how can we recognize if it's happening in our own lives? Because I can see a correlation between what you described in family of origin and what you went into professionally. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
I think it's essentially a relationship where you have no boundaries, and as a child, you can't control that situation, like when you're abnormally close, and to some people that may seem great, but when there is abuse involved, either like emotionally, physically, spiritually, or mentally, or even as a child, you're expected to fix this person or your parent's life, or you're always very, very hyper cognizant of their feelings. And maybe to some people it doesn't seem that bad, but then as a child, you grow up. Like I was always walking around eggshells for a very long time because I was so hypersensitive of aware of how my mother felt in any situation. I had no idea how I felt, until I felt really, really obliterated. That was the point where I started to stand up and kind of get the mess off me. But it's a relationship where there are no boundaries. And I think for any relationship, even between a child and a parent, you have to have some boundaries. Say the word no, or just know that you can't go there. Like, I like to describe my book as like a middle-aged version, like a middle-aged doctor version of Jeanette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died, you know? And in the book, she describes it, although it's not a new term, she talks about enmeshment. Enmeshment, that term's been around for a very long time, but with her like amazing like bestseller, she brought it up again. And she talks about how she was so close to her mother. Like her mother was still doing like vaginal and breast exams on her in the shower at age 16 because she was so afraid her daughter was going to get breast cancer. Do you know, it's like that kind
Yeah.
of relationship. And although my parents didn't touch me, I was always aware of their like emotions. And my mother had no friends. I was best friends with my mom, and my best friend, like physically, emotionally, mentally abused me. And I described this in the book, but like the last time she hit me was when I was 26 years old. And even then, I was so concerned about her. When she was hitting me over a crashed car, like it didn't occur to me that I could walk away. That's how bad it is. Like I could have walked out of the house. Like I'm a grown ass adult, but I didn't because I didn't know that was an option.
I have
And
a
I knew
question.
not to call 911.
I have a question for you about that because you see so much. They'll say if you were raised in this enmeshed type of family, you tend to marry either into an enmeshed family or a very codependent situation with your partner. You married a career into which you became enmeshed with, but from just knowing you and reading your book, you did not repeat any of those patterns in your marriage. In fact, it was your husband who said, go do this, take this time. And he just comes off as incredibly supportive. How do you break that pattern that you did?
Well, I think like him coming into my life is a gift from God. However, I do feel like there were many moments in my life where I could have sabotaged it. Because, so what a pattern that I talk about in the book is like generational trauma, the trauma passed down your like, generations of your family, and even like the frank abuse from my mother. Like when my parents fought, I didn't really go into this too much in the book, but it was always physical. They never talked things through. Like my brother and I saw very physical fights, like they're beating each other up. And like for my husband, when I initially met him, when we fought, like I would punch his arm. Like I was very physical. And there was a lot of things that I had to recognize and almost stop and unlearn. But there were many moments where, yeah, I could have sabotaged it. It wasn't just like, oh, you get this gift of a person into your life and all is good. Like I had to learn about, even after fights, oh, that conversation that you have is really important. Or the conversation that you have in front of your children, or even learning not to hit each other. Like I can't do that to my partner.
Right.
Or,
But people
or
are so used to repeating what they see in childhood, they don't even think about it,
exactly.
especially when you're enmeshed.
Exactly. And I think like in order to not do what you've seen, you really have to think about it. Like I still remember the day, like I grew up being hit, like, and when my child was 2 years old, he really frustrated me. And I saw myself raise my hand. And I was wondering who that was, but like I could have gone further, and there's many moments where I have to stop myself or think about it. But I think all of that, when it comes out, that's what you've experienced in your life. And that's the whole point of the book. Like, we have choices. You don't have to go there. If you thought they were an asshole and they did that to you, what's going to happen if you repeat it? Like, you're the asshole, I'm sorry.
No, that's absolutely right. You've got to break that pattern. And you don't ever have to apologize for that, ever. So one of the things that this is kind of a mixed thing, is that you had a list in your book about the generational bundle that can happen. And I aced that. I really did well on that list, by the way. And I was looking at how interconnected they all are, because it's not usually an isolated cause of trauma. Usually it's insidious and it may present in many different ways. That was the first part. I just want to acknowledge it's a great list. The other part is you quote Dr. Bruce Lipton a lot in your book. And he is, the biology of belief is his work. Incredible. Do you feel that his work validated what you already knew intuitively as a physician and as a person? That you didn't really learn it, that you already knew it?
Yeah, I mean, like he brought up generational trauma for me. Like, like that's the thing. As a primary care doctor, I was a primary care doctor at the last portion of my medical career. I still tinkle in the hospital right now, but like that's the thing. Like when people come into the examining room, right? Even though you only have minutes with them, when the door closes, it's amazing how many people are in pain. And there's nothing I can do about it because I don't have time to get into it. And that's a really sad portion. But that was something that I was noticing, like the number of people who are in pain. And then the question becomes, because of what? Like, what happened to you? But our medical, like the way medicine is structured, we don't have time to get into it. And I really feel like that's part of the bigger problem. Maybe that's why nothing's getting cured, like those pains that you feel in your body, or that constant anxiety, or that stomach upset. It could be anything, how it manifests. And he kind of, like, he gave me the idea that, like, you know, what we can't change what we've experienced, but we can change like the rest of our lives. And I'm not gonna lie, it's a lot of active effort and it's like a process and it's painful. But that's like our, that's our initiative. That's what we're capable of doing. And maybe that's why we're still alive.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes down to facing all of that, and not just keep burying it. I mean, you have one section called learn to uproot fears and resentments instead of burying them. And that's something I believe so strongly. You got to pull it up by the weed. And yet I think so many people are afraid to do that. You talk about the firefighter who came in and no longer liked his job and he was having chest pains, but his cardiograms, I think it's called. All of his tests came back and they were fine. So it was clearly connected to his job stress. And I see people like that all the time. And sometimes I'm not a doctor, but I'll say to them, like if someone has like right shoulder pain, I always go, "Ooh, right is masculine. So who's the guy in your family or your work that you're carrying on your back right now?" And they'll look at me and go, "Wait, what? Oh, yeah, my boss is kind of an asshole this week." But they don't often connect the physical pain with the emotional. Why do you think it's so hard to uproot those hidden fears and resentments? And what are some of your best strategies for pulling those weeds up?
Well, you bring up so many beautiful points. And this is what I really admire about your line of work, both of you, because I think you do what doctors don't do. Like, you actually acknowledge the human struggle, like our pain. While in medicine and medical care, we evade it, right? Oh, you have pain? Here's a narcotic. Do you need some benzos to take away your anxiety? There's no real work being done, and that's such a shame. But you actually talk with someone and you can sense where they're coming from. You feel their like human struggle and their pain, which is so much more than what the rest of us are doing. And I was talking to a psychiatrist and he works with alcoholics and he always says when someone stops drinking, like it's actually really bad initially before it becomes better. And that's what I wonder about like our pain. Maybe we give up too easily because in order to actually get better, you go through a process that's really, really bad, you know? And most of us are so afraid of that, like how bad it can feel. And maybe because of our fears, we don't actually address it. But then this is something that I wonder, like, what would happen if you didn't give up? Like if you actually faced it, because even though the last third portion like of the book, that's the part that I really love where I talk about like my healing would not have been possible if I didn't address what really pained me. And unfortunately what really pained me like led to my giving up my job, my analyzing my painful relationship with my mother, the fact that like, I still needed her and I didn't have a mother. She was physically there, but not mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. Or the fact that like my father's continuing pattern is always abandoning, even though he's still alive. Like I had to face that for me to learn to love myself. And I think that's what I meant by uprooting the pain. You actually have to look at those roots. You actually, like you've said many times in your podcast, you actually have to shine the light on that, on the ugly stuff. And in the beginning of the book, I quote Pema Chodron because in this Instagram, Facebook, social media life, we only want to look at the pretty, but what if it's all meant to exist? The ugly, the pretty, the sad, the happy. It's like a fulcrum. You're always supposed to go back and forth. And sometimes people stay in the sad portion or, what really, or their pain. But what if life is really fluid? And if you take care of yourself, you're able to go back and forth, and maybe it becomes narrower so you don't feel such pain. Like right now, I've gotten to a point, I know it took many years, but like I've gotten to a point where I can talk about my mother rationally and not fall apart. I can, like I can control our future. She's still an asshole, but like I can control our future. And unfortunately, I don't want to be the kind of person who dumps her ass, even though I secretly like, have delusions about it. But I don't think I would be okay with myself on my dying bed. And some people, cool if you are, sometimes some things are just unforgivable. But for me as a person, and sorry, it's like jumping all over the place, but like I took the Hippocratic Oath. If a person comes in from incarceration and they've done really, really bad things and they're like totally handcuffed to the bed, as a medical professional, I still have to treat them. And it kind of made me think, like, even though I'm not treating my mother, why can't I show her some like basic human respect
Yeah.
for the life she's living, even though I think she's an asshole, and that means like not going in there too much, but like sending her toilet paper or I don't know, getting an Airbnb for her, like I don't have to cut all ties, but it has to be in a very healthy way for me with boundaries.
Yeah, with lots of boundaries.
You queued that up so beautifully for my next question. I can't even believe it. And I'm going to read a little bit from your book, and it says discernment is important so that we remember that we're on our path. We have to discern and think about what's real versus what's fake and absurd. It's important to be awake to decide what information is right for us in our lives and not be blindly guided by untruth or distraction. And it goes on and on about growing, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. That is such an important point of everything that you're saying is it's our path, and what you may have experienced and in a seen as heinous, someone else may not, but it's a very personal journey. From we can all do the aces, we can say, oh, I have childhood trauma, pick me, but when you really discern, well, this is mine, this is how I choose to own it and move forward, that changes the whole game, and it does bring back the empowerment. But how do you feel you practice discernment? And the example you use is with unrealistic standard body standards. But what would be some tips for people to actually practice discernment and realize I have to accept who I am, where I am, and why I'm doing it the way that I do?
I think it begins with honestly just being nice to yourself, like just basic kindness, like what Bruce Lipton had brought up on my podcast was that, he's like, you kind of know where you are in your life. If you look in the mirror and you say, I love myself. And I was like, holy crap, like that's not me. Like that's an indication that maybe, I'm not at the right place, but it's so true. Like, I was like repeating Louise Hay in front of the mirror and telling myself, I love and appreciate myself because you guys told me to do that, right? But I'm like, oh God, I feel like I'm totally lying. But the funny part is that like after you keep on saying it, your like mind, body, spirit sort of starts to believe it. And I think that's just like that basic kindness, that basic humanity, mercy is really, really important to get anywhere in life, Because what I really meant by the book is that like you have everything you need actually inside of you. But the problem about life, and especially capitalistic life, is like we always want to look elsewhere for it or we want to buy it. But girl or guy, you have like everything you need inside of you, And it begins with just kind of starting to take it out. And so when you start taking stuff out, some of it's your shit, some of it's good, some of it's still more muddy stuff, but like all of it is really legit.
I want to talk about some of the techniques you employ in the book about letter writing. You have a beautiful letter from that you imagine your mom writing, and you have a beautiful letter that you write to yourself. Could you talk about how that's such a healing aspect of this discernment and waking up and learning to love ourselves process?
Oh, yes. And this is what I also wanted to mention. Like this is kind of like a part memoir, part muckraker talking about corporate medicine, part self-help book. It's not all of one. But I think it's kind of not right when someone tells you, oh, do it this way, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because not everyone's life is the same. And with the example of the book, I bring up things, right? But I also use myself as the example, not to tell you to do, but just to kind of like, I think sometimes it's easier to empathize when, and kind of understand your own situation when someone else is talking about their own shit. But anyway, the whole point was, I had Jennifer Edwards on the show because I invited her after I listened to yours. And before she was on the show, she had done a reading for me. And it started off with an astrology reading. And she was like, oh, yo, Michelle, like you really need to like write your mom a pretend letter and maybe not send it. And then I thought about this for months. And I don't think like I hated my mother so much then. I was like kind of past that point. But I didn't want to write her a letter, even if I didn't send it. And I was thinking about this and I realized, oh my gosh, like I would love to hear from her. Like I needed this letter. So what I decided to do was like, Eve Ensler, or formerly Eve Ensler, who's now V, she wrote this book from the voice of her father who physically and sexually abused her. So I decided to write this letter to myself from my mother's higher spirit because my mother in this life is very mentally ill. She can't understand things. Like you tell her something and it's like it's your fault for going into it because you can't talk to her about anything, like but if I had the capacity to hear from my mother's higher self, what would she say to me? Describing the past, present, and future. And that was a very powerful moment for me because by writing from her perspective, like my knowing her, it allowed for me to basically control my future. I'm fully aware that as a child of someone, like even though we don't want to say it, even as a grown-ass adult, you still want your parent to be rooting for you. Even just hearing kind words from her higher spirit that she loves me, that she wished like she had held me a little longer. Those were like words that my soul needed to hear. And it was a very strong moment for me because like I read it to myself on the podcast. And it really touched my soul, like it was exactly that I needed to, or her explaining how she became who she was. Because being a longtime listener and longtime fan of your podcast, like I feel like there are many moments in life where we choose. And unfortunately, her whole path has been her choosing. Even when she felt like she wasn't choosing, she was choosing. And now, unfortunately, I feel like she's really lost. And maybe there's not that much I can do. But there's a place, maybe not in this dimension that where we could have a great relationship. And maybe it'll be better when she dies. Not that I hope for that, but yeah, like realistically speaking, she's limited here.
Mhm.
And that's another part that's a thread throughout your whole book is the amount of bravery and tenacity it took to face what you had been through, to break all those expectations with your family of origin, with your professional career. And you end the book, your last chapter is I choose to be less afraid. And I think so many people are stuck in a situation for exactly that reason. They're afraid. Who will I become? How is this going to hurt people? How will I support myself or take care of myself or any of the variables we want to put in there? So what was the nudge that got you to say, you know what, I have to face this fear anyway? And for me, it was, I knew if I didn't make some changes, I was going to end up very ill. And you talk about that a lot in your book about the mind-body connection. So what was your catalyst to face the fear?
Well, I think it was very clear to me that I was becoming someone who like I didn't like.
Mhm.
Like I was like really, really angry all the time and I couldn't shut it off. Like my mind was racing. And this wasn't like a 1 month thing. It was like a couple year thing, you know? And like normally I'm like even keeled, like I like to laugh, and that was not who I was becoming. And there's a certain personality that's kind of described working in the hospital. Like I don't know how they are initially, but they become very cynical, very sarcastic, very abrupt with people. And I was becoming that, you know? But then like it was getting to a point where it's like a roller coaster ride. And I started to think, like I mentioned before, like about my death.
Mhm.
Like I felt like something was growing inside of me because of this anger, and then when you realistically like think about things like, could I do this forever and be okay? Or the other question is, I hate this job so much, but like, are they going to care if I die? Like I knew my own answers. And even though I was very, very afraid because I had all these like what I knew what society thought was success and I should have been happy, it wasn't doing it for me. Like, even though I hit my rock bottom and there was like a year where, like I really grieved, even though I still did the podcast, like I'm still okay. Like I'm a version of myself where I don't regret it.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful moment in life to get to and to recognize that there is so much anger and that the anger is it's okay and it's valid and justified. But I remember hitting a point where I actually said to my therapist, Dr. Bennett, I was like, I have all this righteous anger. Like I have every right to be angry, just like you had every right to be angry. And I said, but I feel like someone passed me the hot potato. Remember that game?
Mm-hmm.
And I've got this hot potato of anger. I don't want to pass it to anyone else. That's not fair, but I don't know what to do with it. And he always had an answer. And he said, I don't have an answer. You have to figure that out. And I remember being angry about that. But I think what I took away from your book is that all of the healing that we need to go through in life has to be done from within with us and kind of by ourselves. I mean, sure, you can have helpers and mentors along the way, but ultimately it's we who have to do that.
Yeah, it's still the work, and you'll meet like, good people along the way to really talk with. But maybe your medical provider, they're not in the right place to actually help you.
Right.
That's the total truth. And some people stop at that, they give up. But my point was, don't give up. Like what you feel is absolutely legit. If you keep on feeling it and it's not going away, like you are so right. But find other people on your path that are going to help you to understand. Because I think a lot of times we need resources. Like for me, when I was realizing I was going towards my rock bottom, like I started to read self-help books, like books that you mentioned, Samantha. Like I was like reading books from like doctors who I thought were kind of like fell off the wagon, like Eben Alexander, Many Lives, Many Masters, Dr. Brian Weiss, Dying to Be Me, like Lissa Rankin, like they became my heroes.
It is so beautifully said. And intuitively, it feels like you're a forerunner in where medicine and where traditional Western medicine at least in this part of the world is going, is that we have to get back to incorporating the whole person and preventative care and empowering people with their own health rather than there's a friend that I know, and her mom is quite ill right now. And the mother puts on has her hands over her ears, la la la, and in complete denial about the lifestyle choices that she's making. And is saying, but the doctor told me to take this medication. The doctor told me to do that. And I feel like this book, your work, you're being brave enough to step out, is helping people realize this is a professional who is there to support me, but I have to ask myself, is this really helping me or is it holding me stuck in a loop tape?
Oh my gosh, that's so beautifully said, because you're absolutely right. Because doctors, because they're so busy, will give you an answer, but it doesn't mean it's the best answer. They will give you an answer to kind of go on to the next patient, but you have to ask yourself, is this legit? Is this a real answer? Because I'll be really honest with you, someone who has chronic pain, that's the most frustrating to doctors because they can't get into why. Why does this person continue to have so much pain? And I think it's very multifactorial. It could be what you're experiencing now, what you've experienced in the past, what happened to you, what meds you're taking. It could be like, or what you're eating or doing, right? The very complicated picture that a lot of people do not want to get into. And then you're put into kind of a category, and they're only gonna, give you more meds. You're put into a chronic pain group when, you know what? You're understanding your body, you're not feeling well, something's wrong, but the right people are not listening to you. So my suggestion to you, my recommendation is find the right people, but most of the work lies within you, but it's all of it. If you don't know what it really is, then think about it. Like, it could be all of it. What you're doing now and what's happened before in the past, like, it's all really real. But everyone else is going to be like, no, that's just in your head.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's painful and costly. I mean, my dad was misdiagnosed with Parkinson's for 4 years, and we had to wait for a specialist up at Duke before he was properly diagnosed with Alzheimer's. But during those 4 years, his Parkinson's meds were over 600 a month. So,
That's so
not only is
crazy.
it just a Band-Aid upon Band-Aid solution, but it's also incredibly costly and ridiculous. All right, tell us about your podcast, Lost or Found, because it's fabulous, and I want people to check it out if they have not.
Well, the whole point of the podcast, and I didn't realize, initially it was because, I wanted to have conversations that I really couldn't have in the office about what really contributes to our health. So, that's how the podcast began, out of my midlife crisis. But then I realized, oh shit, this podcast was for me. Like, even with my own healing, like, I never heard of generational trauma. I had never really talked about adverse childhood experiences, or even like learning about the mind, body, spirit. Like, anyway, it's been a huge like educational path for me. And it's really a project of love, but then it led to the book as I started to think about my own things.
Yeah, and you've had some fantastic guests on there. I mean, not only Dr. Bruce Lipton, but you've had a lot of really well-known people. I mean,
Yeah, it's been really exciting, and I feel like I need to put more work into it, but I've been hustling a little bit more because I'm not sure what my future is going to be like. So I've been hustling more in the medical field a little, but at least I control my schedule. But like, that's the thing. Like, even if like you write a book, you think, "Oh my gosh, like, I'm set." Uh-uh. Like, no, not at all. Like, you still need to like keep on working to like figure things out. No one's life is set. And if they say it's set, it's like they're just lying.
so one of the worst phrases I think that ever got introduced into the lexicon is happily ever after. Because we always think if you hit this milestone, that milestone, this achievement, you're going to finally earn happily ever after. There's no such thing. Life is a beautiful roller coaster of ups and downs. And I think when we start to see life as a quilt, a fabric of many different moments and emotions, then we can ride those difficult waves more easily.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's such a misnomer, and I feel like you have to be so careful because on social media and everything, like, they want the beautiful, the simplistic, the no work, but there's no such thing. And oh my God, you're gonna age. Like, aging is part of living. Like, how is there no aging on like Instagram? It's not real. So that's what I meant by like discernment, but also like, if I ask myself this question, because there's going to be no point in my life, or I'm sure anyone's life, where, oh, you reached the hill, you're done, right? I don't think that exists, but I think this is something that I ask myself, like, no matter what happens, do you regret it? Like, will I have any regrets? And right now, like, I don't know what will happen with my book, but it was a, act of love. I poured my heart into the book, and especially the last third. Like, I feel like my healing, that was totally my heart. Like, but I feel like that's something I will never ever regret.
No, and nor should you. It's a beautiful book. It's honest, it's authentic, and it's hopeful.
So
Thank
just
you.
one last quick question, because I know we need to finish up, is you're still kind of dabbling a bit in the medical field and it's still a connection. Has that changed dramatically since you have been more open with yourself and put the book out? Has it changed your relationships with colleagues or with your relationship to doing medical work, traditional medicine?
Definitely. I'm definitely being labeled as like the woman who, who left the medical field, right? And a lot of people can come in, I mean, a lot of people find you that way. Or random people like will tell me what's going on in their lives. And it's like I have to like diagnose moral injury for them. Like they don't know what that is, or they have a near-death experience. And I literally all I do is just translate it for them.
I love that.
It's like they're not listening to enlightened empaths, so they don't understand what they're experiencing. So I'm like, I literally just translate for them. Like, yo, mofo, you had a near-death experience. You need to rethink about what your future will be because you have actual choices you can make. Or you know that anger that you're experiencing, that may not be burnout, but moral injury. Because they don't care if you die. We're replaceable in 2 weeks. That's the reality. So why are you giving your life to something that you, number one, don't care about, and then number two, you're utterly replaceable, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, I translate a lot, but there's other things like, I do virtual home health shifts, and I don't know if I can say this out loud. Oh my God, the medical like diagnoses, it's like everyone has the same medical diagnoses. It's high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes type 2, heart failure. Then, heart disease, heart attack, stroke. It's like everyone has the same diagnoses. And if we know that everyone has the same diagnoses, why are we not doing a better job at preventing this? And this is our medical care. Like, I really want you to think about that. This is our medical care. They know what the number one money makers are and what most people are experiencing. All of that stuff is called metabolic syndrome, but we prevent none of it. And that's where we come in. Like, your insurance, your doctor may not help you prevent it, but you know what? There's everything that you can do now
Yeah.
so that you live better and that you age better, you know?
Yeah, and I
That-
think a lot of that prevention starts with pulling these fears and this anger and this all this childhood stuff up by the root. I really do think that mind-body connection is essential.
Yeah. And just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Right.
They're not talking about it because number one, they may not get it, but also number two, it doesn't make money for them. So, you know, that doesn't mean it's not important or it doesn't exist. It's just not a money maker for them.
Wow. Well, I have so enjoyed this. And like I said, we absolutely love the book. Tell people where they can find you and find the book.
Oh yeah, and you can find Entangling on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. And my name is Michelle Choi. I hope to be a medical gangster kind of talk. But it's a kind of like a repressed childhood, repressed 20s, and now I get to be myself. And I decided if I'm going to differentiate myself from anyone in this lifetime, I just really have to be myself. So that's why I'm here.
Michelle, we love you. All right, your podcast is Lost or Found, and your website is Michelle Choi, CHOIMD.com, MichelleChoiMD.com. And we'll put that in our show notes and on social media pages when this goes live. Thank you so much. Best of luck with Untangling, and thank you for coming back on the show and sharing your beautiful story.
And thank you both. I just want to say how greatly you've affected my life and, impacted my own growth. And I hope you really know that. Like, I wouldn't have discovered spirituality until, I started listening to you both.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. And like I said to you years ago, our moms should get together and go bowling because we got a lot in common.
My mom can't, socially interact with people, but yeah.
Well, well, thank you guys so much for listening. Please remember, as always, to show up, do great work, and share your light.